Good afternoon, Reading Room. We are here on day 198 of the classroom. I'm the teacher. I keep opening and closing the door and putting on my shawl and taking up. We're leaving the shawl on. It feels nice then for me. Drinking more water. I said this in Early Birds, but I changed my flavor. And these are delicious. So sparkling waters, 59 cents. I think that's really good. But you know, I don't know. I don't need that. I need my book though. We're finishing up Being Catholic Now. I hope we finish it up. I just had a whole dose of 6 hours of Catholicism. Not so nice. One way or another, trying to destroy good people. It seems to me, I don't know. I'll stick with these glasses. Being Catholic Now. We likely should finish it today. We are finishing up with Steve Otellini. Too many syllables today, the second time. And there he is, looks to be a priest. We'll go this way. Stephen Otellini, born April 28, 1952, is Monsignor at the Church of the Nativity in Menlo Park, California. He served on the Vatican Diplomatic Corps as assistant to the Papal Nuncio to the Central African Republic, Chad, the Congo, and later in Greece. I heard they went economically bankrupt. I was born and raised in San Francisco. I'm in the second generation of American citizens. My mother still lives in the house that my parents bought right after they were married, an indication of the remarkable stability in which I was raised. San Francisco was very different than it is now. I went to Catholic grammar school, and by 8th grade, I had a strong enough inclination to join the priesthood that I enrolled in the seminary. Becoming a priest isn't something I chose to do. Rather, it's a vocation, and I chose to respond to the call. The question is, do I have the ability to respond to it and be faithful to it? There were difficult times in the church. I entered in 1966, so the Vatican Council had just ended, and all of the changes, not just the liturgical changes, but the sociological and theological changes were going on, and it was a whirlwind of activity inside and outside the seminary. After, I don't know. There were a lot of changes. I was just thinking, were there a lot of changes? Latin, not said in Latin anymore. We better get some readings in there. I don't know. That are actually found in the Bible. I don't know. I make some things up as I go along. Look it up. After I finished my license degree, the bishop asked me to return to Rome to do studies for the diplomatic service. When I was told my first assignment would be in Bangui, I went to my friend E.J. Dion, who covered the Vatican and had gone there with the Pope. So I said, what is in Bangui? And he said, there is a lovely hotel there that has a kind of a terrace that overlooks nothing of downtown Bangui. After Africa, I went to Greece. Then I came back to pastoral duties in San Francisco before the bishop assigned me to be president of Marin High School. The phenomenon of Catholic education in the United States dramatically changed American society over the past 100 years. The vast majority of Italian immigrants in the United States had no education whatsoever. 2 generations after the first real wave of Italian immigration, you look at the proportion of people who have achieved higher degrees or made contributions in business or science, and there is a huge proportion of those who are Italian Catholics. So here, from a non-educated group who primarily were educated in Catholic grammar school systems, now we have Antonin Scalia sitting on the Supreme Court. Yeah, Antonin. I'm seeing if the accent was a little different. On the Supreme Court, it is an extraordinary thing. The future is bright, but there is a growing danger of elitism attached to it, primarily because of expenses. To maintain a quality faculty, you want to pay them a somewhat decent salary, and obviously we were getting no government aid and had no endowment. When I left, tuition was $12,000 a year, which is pretty steep for a new immigrant. At Marin, 80% of the kids were Catholic, and of those who were not Catholic, almost all of the others were Christians, a few Muslims, and maybe 1 or 2 Jewish boys. Aside from the very important role of communicating a Catholic formation to people, which is the reason for our existence, the secondary benefit we're giving these people is a quality education and a head start for their lives. That's pretty good. I like the orange one. I was going to put cream in it to make it like a creamsicle. It's actually not necessary. I'll leave the cream for the coffee. When we're children, we picture ourselves sitting with the angels in the company of friends in heaven. As we mature and our faith grows, we begin to learn that heaven is going to be a fuller, more complete experience of the life in the world as we see it now, with all of those anxieties, tensions, and limitedness that we experience here removed. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Just, sin. How about sin is going to be removed? And that's a little bit more clear about what you're talking about. Anxieties, tensions, limitedness that we experience. I don't know. What are you going to tell me? You run the show? Don't worry about anything? 2 different things. It isn't the case that people who go to hell cease to be loved by God, but they've been placed in hell by ceasing to love in a way in which Christ teaches us to love God and our neighbors. I don't think that makes a lot of sense either. Heaven isn't like Disneyland, where once you get through the gate, you get to go on the rides for free. The idea is that we make ourselves capable of receiving God's love in this world. Why did you just make it sound like work? And to the extent that we make ourselves receptive to God's love, God will fill that up in us. So that is very different from each human being. To the extent that we have done away with our selfishness in the world and open ourselves to God's love, then in heaven we will be filled. It is going to be different for someone who has lived a very selfless life and someone who has lived a somewhat selfish life than for those who have opened themselves up only a little bit. What are you saying? It's not clear to me, but it is almost over. The spiritual enjoyment someone like St. Francis of Assisi or Mother Teresa is going to be much greater than someone who, in the last minute, decided that their life was kind of miserable, and they did convert and turn to the Lord and made their act of contrition and died. See, that just seems dumb to me. That just seems like very, very much shallow view, which is why your pages are, 3. Their enjoyment of God and their capacity to receive God is probably very small compared to these great saints, and therefore God will fill up certainly what is there, but it is going to be different in both of those cases. A capacity to receive is different, but once you have grace, your capacity to receive is all, is all. Martin Sheen, that was it. That's all he had to say about being Catholic. Martin Sheen, so he's the actor, so here they're showing him at First Communion. Martin Sheen, née Ramon Estevez, August 3rd, 1940, is a three-time Emmy and Golden Globe award-winning actor, best known for his role in the film Apocalypse Now and the television drama series The West Wing. Sheen is a devoted Catholic, known for his robust support of liberal political causes. He has advocated for a wide range of human rights, peace, and environmental causes, particularly focused on immigrants' rights and anti-poverty issues. Sheen is shown above at his First Communion in Dayton, Ohio. Both of my parents were very devout Catholics from Spain and Ireland. I grew up in a large family, 9 boys and 1 girl. My mother died when I was about 11, so I grew up in a very traditional immigrant type of Catholic family, first-generation Americans. That's not very traditional. I was educated in grade school by the Sisters of Notre Dame and then went to an all-boys Catholic high school, that is. I was an altar boy in an old Latin church, a lot of which I still remember. I drifted from the church and the faith for a long time, starting in the early 1960s, right when it was changing. I was focusing on a career. We were starting our family every now and then. I'd go to Mass or confession, but I really wasn't steady. Catholicism didn't have a personal meaning to me until 1977 when I had a heart attack in the Philippines while working on Apocalypse Now. And that woke me up. I had the last rites, and when I recovered, I became very devout again. Then I realized my devotion was out of fear of dying and going to the other side unprepared, and I wanted to be on the winning side. Eventually, I let it go again. I was drinking very heavily. I'm a known alcoholic. I was on a search that culminated in India in 1981. I went there to do a small part of the movie Gandhi. I'd been in third world countries before, but I'd never seen the depth of human poverty and degradation. It made a profound impression on me. From there, I went to Paris for 3 months, and I had a lot of time to reflect on what I'd seen in India and the path that I'd been on for all these years, particularly the last 4. I was staying in a hotel across from St. Joseph's Church in Paris, and it was the only English-speaking church in all of France. I dropped in, and I was somewhat astonished that it was all in English. How extraordinary. The priest was facing the people. Now I started to get interested. It's interesting to me how Martin Sheen is telling us something in depth about his faith and how that priest told us nothing. It's so interesting to me. You devoted your life, but you have nothing to say. You know what I have to say? Hundreds of videos worth of things to say about what I believe in. Being in that now. It seems to me that being you, if you have nothing to say about being Catholic, and maybe those two are distinct things. I don't know. Seems weird. An old dear friend of mine, Terry Malik, the director of Badlands, was living in Paris, and I ran into him by accident on the street one day. We were both living on the left bank, and he was a very devout and deeply spiritual man, less religious than spiritual, but very religious too. He became, not by either of our choices, but just by reality, a spiritual advisor for me and my confidant. I began to tell him about my search, and he would give me literature to read. We'd go to services sometimes. The last book he gave me was The Brothers Karamazov. And that had a profound effect on me. I was so moved by how an artist could speak to the problems of the heart, the soul, and the spirit. That was the step that I knew I needed to take. The Brothers, it's Karamazov. That was all right. I had May 1st, 1981 off. In Europe, of course, it was a national holiday. So I went to church. It would be May Day. It was one of those days when you wake up and know this is the day you have to do this and nothing is going to deter you. I decided I would come back to the church. I went to the church and the door was locked. I was knocking and ringing the bell. I waited and waited and nobody came. I pounded and pounded. I thought, am I meant to do this? I felt that the impetus was there. And then I thought maybe it wasn't meant to be. I pounded again and finally I gave up. Just as I came down the steps, the doors flew open. The priest was standing there eating his lunch and he had some food on his face and a napkin in his hand. He looked over the top of my head as if there was an emergency because of all the banging and ringing. He looked down at me and said, "What is it?" I said, "I'm sorry to bother you, Father, but I've been away from the church many, many years, and I'd like to come back. I'd like to go to confession." He looked at me and something behind his eyes said, "You came to the right place." He knew that it was important. It was an important moment for me. And, I can see those kinds of moments a lot for Catholics. I can see that a lot. A wonderful real expression of faith. Because Catholics, I think, always know they're part of the church and they'll come back, or they'll do it. They're in touch with God. Those kinds of things. And that's why sitting on the Supreme Court like that just doesn't sit well with me. If you didn't see it, it's worth a view. Being Catholic now. Okay. I think that's a pretty good view to have for our backdrop of finishing up being Catholic now. This is our last excerpt. Good job, crew. Good job. Great finish. He got it instantly. It was the most extraordinary confession. All my brokenness poured out, and he said, "Welcome back." I was so overjoyed, and that started the honeymoon. I'd come back out of love and joy, no longer fear. It was mine now. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of not living, not really being alive. Uh-oh, I have one more. And said, "Mother will receive you." The door burst open and she came in. I wept. We stood up and she was tiny. She was as small as a child. I thought she was 8 feet tall. What was she doing being a child? She was full of energy. Joe went about explaining his motivations and I was sitting there with my mouth open. Mother was listening to every word and she said, "You want to represent the Vatican at the World Court?" Joe said, "That's my intention," she said. "Sounds like a wonderful idea. You want me to take this to the Pope?" "Yes, I will do that." She asked about our families and what we did with our lives. Joe said, all right, I skipped a whole page. "It's got to be personal. Until 1981, it was never personal with me. It was always something that was given to me, and I felt that I had to do it. I had to be a Catholic and do all things righteously, because if you didn't, you will go to hell. God forbid. I don't know what my salvation means in a personal sense. For me, a better word is freedom. We're meant to be free spiritually, emotionally, and physically. We have to know we're human. I don't think we can ever be talked out of that once we're anchored in a faith once we're able to see God's presence. The central mystery of Catholicism is so powerful. It's simple. God became human. Go figure. I was almost 41 years old before I had a sense of being loved. If your religion isn't about truly being loved, I don't know if you can translate it into daily life. You have to know it if you're loved. I'm still like a child when I get online for communion. I have a little prayer I say just to get me to that place of reception. I'm Ramon, called Martin, your brother. You are welcome here. Whatever you bring is a feeling of absolute freedom and joy. I had a whole bunch of arrests during the wars in El Salvador and Nicaragua. We had a coalition. We would get arrested every Wednesday morning. I would spend a day in jail and then have to appear in front of a judge. It was a federal thing. I came before this wonderful woman judge. I had like a dozen or more arrests at that point. I'm always arrested under my real name, Ramon. So she said, Ramon, what am I going to do with you? She was shaking her head and said, it doesn't do anything to send you to jail. You will go there every week. Will you give community service? I said, I will. Since it didn't have any impact to send me to jail, the judge gave me community service in a soup kitchen run by Sister Rose Harrington, one of my heroes. Sister Rose said, will you wash dishes? I said I could. She explained that they called clients ma'am and sir. They were always kind and courteous to clients, and if you came there to help, you were privileged to serve these people. I stayed 10 years because I loved it. One day, a very fundamental fellow came in. I don't know what religion he was. He could have been Catholic. He thought we should have grace before meals with the homeless, and he approached the sister about it. Sister said, the grace is that we're given this privilege to serve them. I don't think we have to trouble them with religion. She was made free by the work. Most Christian religions in America are very convenient. There's this sense of all I have to do is this, this, and this. You're not being challenged, and no one's going to insist that you step up. A long time ago, I got used to not being comfortable. I'm never as comfortable as when I'm uncomfortable. It's true spiritually. It's that I always have a sense of choice in this matter. The choice is always human. When it's not human, I feel concerned. So I'm never as comfortable as when I'm uncomfortable. Mother Teresa said it was easier to deal with the worst poverty in the third world than it was to deal with the absence of spirituality in America. It was like we were struggling with our possessions, with our image, with our comfort, really, and that was more painful for her. I have a dear friend, Joe Cosgrove. He's the lawyer who represents me in criminal cases. He called me up during the first Gulf War and asked if I was free to join him on a peace mission to Rome to meet up with Mother Teresa. I went over to New York and met him at the airport, and he said, it's just you and me. I said, are you nuts? We're on a peace mission to stop the war. Just you and me? What's your plan? He said, Mother is going to meet us when we get there. I've drawn up a writ to represent the Vatican at the World Court in The Hague because the only nation to oppose the war unilaterally and ask for coming together is the Vatican. I'm having trouble getting through to get permission from the Pope, and I'm going to explain my position. Mother is going to see the Holy Father the next day, and if she agrees with this writ, she'll put in a word for us. Then I'll go to The Hague and represent the Vatican. We got to Rome, we went into this chapel, and as Sister came and said, Mother will receive you, the door burst open and she came in. I wept. We stood up and she was tiny. She was as small as a child. I thought she was 8 feet tall. What was she doing being a child? She was full of energy. Joe went about explaining his motivations, and I was sitting there with my mouth open. Mother was listening to every word, and she said, you want to represent the Vatican at the World Court? Joe said, that's my intention. She said, sounds like a wonderful idea. You want me to take this to the Pope? Yes, I will do that. She asked about our families and what we did with our lives. Joe said he was defending people on death row primarily. He was a public defender. He lived like a monk. He was still paying his student loans to Notre Dame, and he was almost 50 years old. He didn't have a clue that he was poor. At one point, she was seated between us at the card table, and she was getting into a very interesting discussion with Joe. She was reminding him, as if he needed to be reminded, how everything he does is related to God, that no human being is without the divine presence. She reached out, took his hand, placed it on the table, flattened it, and then she said, one word at a time, while touching each finger in succession, "You need it to me. You did it to me." Now I'm looking at that scene and I'm jealous. Mother Teresa is blessing him with all these things, and he's getting all the attention, when suddenly she reached over and took my hand, placed it on the table, then placed hers firmly over mine. And I thought, don't mess with this woman. We were there for over an hour with her. It was the most extraordinary time, and then she bid us good night, and she went to the Vatican the next day. Joe and I hung around, and then Friday morning we came to the early English-speaking Mass. When we got there, it was enough. It was enough. The war had ended that morning. It was February 1991, and Joe said, don't mess with Mother Teresa. During the Mass, we were all crowded in this tiny place. There must have been 100 people in there, all American, mostly English speaking. And when we got to intentions, everybody got their licks in for my uncle so-and-so, Lord, hear my prayers. Then it got real quiet, and this voice said, let us remember to pray for all those we promised to pray for. And that was Mother. She had a very profound effect on me and all of us. That's interesting. Peggy Noonan. And then we're done. And then tomorrow, God is Red by Vine Deloria Jr. We're going to do a chapter. There's 16 chapters, so we'll actually do it in fewer days than we did this book. Peggy Noonan. Born September 7, 1950, is the author of 7 books on politics, religion, and culture, 5 of which have been New York Times bestsellers. She was a special assistant to President Ronald Reagan, working with him on some of his most well-known speeches, and a chief speech writer for Vice President George H.W. Bush when he ran for president in 1988. Noonan's writings are informed by a working-class populist sympathy, a conservative perspective, and a Roman Catholic spirituality. I'm grateful. I'm the grandchild of Irish immigrants. My grandparents, great aunts, and great uncles were schooled in Irish Catholicism. Not all of them went to church, but one who did was my great aunt Mary Jane. She never said, this is what you think, this is what you do. She just took me to church. She had prayer cards in her mirror. If you walked into her bedroom, there were rosary beads on the bedside table. She made a big impression on me. My parents weren't particularly interested in the church and didn't really like it. They were culturally Catholic, but not practitioners of their religion. However, on Sundays, they'd say, go to church. I'm the third of 7 kids. My childhood was pretty chaotic. Churches were peaceful, tall, dark, old, quiet, reflective places of profound equality. You were taught as a Catholic that nobody's better than anybody else. I agree with that. We were all children of God. I was drawn to the implicit equality. I always tell priests, have real candles. Don't get those little electrical things with the button you push. You smell that smell, and it's obviously an olfactory sensation, but it's one of the ways you sense your home. You can sit by yourself and talk to God, and He probably won't bop you on the head. I became a true Catholic at age 40. I always felt the tug of my religion, my faith, but I'd swim in and out of connection for many years. In some ways, it was so strongly connected in me, but in many ways, it wasn't convenient to live a Catholic life or to come back to basics. Then when I was 40, suddenly I knew that I needed Christ. I felt empty in my life. I knew loads of people who were religious, which isn't necessarily usual, at least in New York. Most of them were various kinds of Bible group going or evangelical Protestants. When I would talk to them and say, I feel like I'm thirsting for something, they'd say, it's for Jesus, come to Bible school. These people urged me to read the Bible for the first time in my life. I owe them a lot. I'll never forget sitting in my apartment reading Acts of the Apostles one morning. I realized this is the story of the apostles after Jesus died and rose. This is a fabulous story. So all those wonderful people were certain that they were helping me to become an evangelical Protestant. Well, ironically, what they helped me to become was a real Catholic. It was a great experience for me to be brought back to Christ by Protestants. It gave me an admiration for them and their lovely personal relationship with Christ. Catholicism was in my bones. Everything I've ever read that was Catholic was true to me. I just got it. At the time, I had great recent success, and the destabilization of of her success. That can be a real drama in your life, very much as real failure. Divorce, confusion, trying to bring my son up by myself when I didn't know exactly how to. All of these things were real crises for me, not knowing what my failure was, not knowing how I could support myself. I have a very small and a very easy Catholic school class that I teach once a week, and we've been talking about guardian angels recently. I told the girls this story. We'd had a small meeting of the teachers of the Catholic instruction class, and one of the teachers, an elderly lady at this get to know each other thing, started chatting with me, and she started talking about her guardian angel. It was so cute and so touching. From out of nowhere, she said, do you believe in guardian angels? I said, yeah, I do. I think we all have one. She said, do you ever imagine how yours looks? I said, no, not really. And she said she had imagined what hers looked like and had also asked to find out its name. She prayed on it for months. Let me know your name. Then she was walking down the stairs in her empty home one day, and suddenly she heard the words, I cannot remember the name, but it was something like, I'm Michael. And she thought, Michael, who's that? What an odd thing. She got in the car, rode on, and realized why she'd heard those words. I know what that was. It was my answer to her prayers. I love simple belief. If it is true, simple belief, that is not just another form of silliness. I do not believe these things are true, and I loved her unself-conscious speaking of angels. The girls in my class like the story. Saying the rosary helps you. Saying prayer after prayer, linking them together, can help your mind reflect and go places. It almost summons God and makes him help you. No, not according to the Bible. I think he likes it when you just talk to him. That's not just talking to him, saying prayer after prayer and linking them. 2, I'm a big believer in God. I'm having a good moment. Thank you for this. And then just keep going. I think about God a lot. I try to wake up with a prayer. This is very recent for me. A friend of mine convinced me that you ought to, as soon as you get out of bed in the morning, say a prayer and give God the day. Just sanctify the day to God. Give him your joys and sorrows, your efforts, your work, your disappointment, and your real pleasure of walking down the street. Give it to him and ask him to do with it what he needs and what he must. That's probably my most important prayer. I have a feeling it would be everybody's most important prayer if they did it. That's a great prayer to start every day with. George Bush is said to start out his day with Bible reading. I was on a plane recently, and I brought with me a book on how the biggest problem for man on earth is that he doesn't believe enough in God or trust in him. It said, if you trust God, you'll be happy because you can hand over your white knuckle fear to him. You put everything in his hands. The interesting thing about faith and Christ is that you never get it. It's constant thinking, discovering, making new connections, concluding, and learning. The Bible is still the great book. I'm into the lives of the saints lately. I love their doubts and their struggles. One of my favorite books is Saints for Sinners. It's about more or less obscure, deeply imperfect people who are great. They're killer saints, soldier saints, whore saints, and liar saints. People who found out what was true and it changed their lives. So many of the modern iterations of the Bible are graceless, and it bugs me. I heard the 23rd Psalm recently, and they changed, he leadeth me to green pastures, to he takes me to a verdant place. They make it harder for you to believe by clunking up the language and depoetizing it. All little kids get what my cup runneth over means. You make my drinking vessel overflow is something that would only bore them. It sounds like a plumber. I have to make out a will saying, please say certain prayers at my funeral, not the newfangled version, the old-fangled. We should all watch out for that, or else we'll wind up with some guy saying, he takes me to the verdant place where the vessel overflows. Those who took the simplicity and poetry from the Bible and from the Catechism did a rather wicked thing. I hope that it wasn't deliberate. And it seems to me that it was Catholicism and it was deliberate. That's what it's showing me in those videos that I'm watching, which I talked about in the Bookless classroom. So 3 6-hour videos that I'm watching, and I might actually be able to call it up here because it is relevant to me. There are the 3 of them. So A Lamp in the Dark, Tares Among the Wheat, the sequel to A Lamp in the Dark, and Bridge to Babylon, Rome, Ecumenism, and Bible, and the Bible. A Lamp in the Dark, Part 3. Okay, all right. So those were also giving me a lot of great information that is important about what they're saying about changing the Bible. I was not aware. And I went back and I looked at the Bibles using Bible Gateway, and it is true that the King James Version has the more poetic version, even the New King James Version. And when Erasmus was translating the Bible to Greek from Latin, Latin is a very structured, skeletal language. And so there were I keep thinking of latitudes. That's not really the word that I'm looking for. That Erasmus and Tyndale may have taken with the words, but that's because those original words that were translated from Hebrew and Greek to Latin, which is where they were getting their Bible from now, the Pope, right, or the Catholic Church, they were translating from the Latin. There was this poetic essence of what that word really means in Greek or Hebrew, and that was a laborious task taken under King James. Maybe somebody before him, but maybe it was finished with King James. Not sure about that exactly, because I think it was King Henry VIII that started it. Maybe not. Maybe he was busy with all his wives. Woo! Because of these and of our own changes, it's going to be harder for the next generation to maintain Catholic tradition. Our parents grew up in an America that assumed church as a reality, and our kids are growing up in a post-church America. I try to pass on essentials. Jesus is real. God is real. The most real sentence you'll ever hear is, Christ was born, lived, died for me, and was resurrected. Everything else will come and go. The fabulous jacket you just got, the ratings on the shows that you love, everything comes and goes. That doesn't come and go. It's real and it's forever. I raised my son within the church, but I'm utterly aware and accepting of the fact that he's an independent young man who will go and figure it out on his own. I also believe, since I pray about him a lot, that he'll be fine and find the truth. Amen, sister. I don't disagree with any of the teachings of the Catholic Church. Oh, I do. Pope Benedict had his big statement on Islam and Christianity recently. And as far as I'm concerned, everybody can argue about that and say he is wrong or right. There will always be a left, right, and a center, or a this club and that club. But if we keep our eyes on the essentials, we'll stick together, stay together, and move forward. We had better do that, because it's a rough old world. I worry that the church is becoming divided between theological conservatives and liberals. You worry about it? I don't like it. And I want us to all work together more. We're Catholics, and that is enough to unite Catholic Republicans and Catholic Democrats. And then we can differ on political party stuff. If you're Catholic, you care about the poor, and it's where your sympathies are and your heart is. But you can come to very different policy thoughts about how to help. At least we're all starting at the same place. I wouldn't have advice for a friend who disagrees with the church. I know doctrine is a struggle for modern Catholics, but I think it's always been a struggle for all Catholics. It's not for sissies. Part of me thinks, could we leave this to the theologians, let them figure it out, and I'll keep my eye on the prize, to keep my eye on the central truth. I try not to ever argue with people about these things that are at the bottom mysterious. I bring a very grateful heart to Catholicism. Probably most of the great saints brought a fighting or turbulent heart. I'm one of the people who wants to say, in part, go figure it out and let me know. I know that what I'm saying is wrong in a way, and I know it's at odds with the spirit of the age. However, that's where I am. I never thought about birth control much until I saw Mother Teresa speak about it in Washington. She spoke of abortion and artificial forms of contraception and where the church stands and why. For the first time I thought, I understand. She put it in terms of love, honoring each other and honoring God. It makes me uncomfortable because I have views, but I live in the world. I'm more than aware of the difficulties of everybody in the world with regard to having and trying to bring up children. We've somehow gone from a world in which you could have 10 kids and scrape by to a world in which 4 or 5 is a very tough thing to do. We know what is right and do our best and not judge each other. It's our job to seriously pray for each other. I wish I did more. That would be my biggest construction to make things better. We all should argue with the church. We're all thinking beings. And that is something right there. We should all argue with the church. This book here that I talked about today, The Scopes Trial, A Dangerous Idea, the Monkey Scopes Trial, the original fight over science in schools, and it is the original fight, really is a theological perspective that says leave out thinking. And that's where sheeple are being made in the church, right there. Leave out thinking. Just follow with faith. No, we should all argue with the church. We're all thinking beings. God gave us brains. He doesn't want the love of slaves. He doesn't want the love of slaves. And when you leave out thinking, you are a proponent of, an advocate of people being slaves. He doesn't want the love of slaves. He wants us to think it through and get it right. My idea of heaven is a place where you find out everything. You find out what's true and why it's true. Everyone's idea of heaven probably says something about them, maybe more than they know. When you start seriously believing in God and you believe he set the world in motion, that indeed he breathed upon the waters and it was good, you get an advanced appreciation of nature and of the beauty of the non-man-made world. History is the working out of man's fate on earth. That's an expression of God. It didn't make me more anti-abortion. It made me more loving about life. And that's what we expect from the Supreme Court. And that's what we wouldn't get with a whole Supreme Court filled with Catholics. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. You have a history. You have a history, Catholics, of not making reparations and not fully understanding much other than your papal responsibilities. And it is incriminating for you. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. We are here back on day one of our 3 days on. It is day 198 of the classroom. We are here. It is May 27th. Thanks for joining me. We have 1 day of our 3 days down. I appreciate it.